Hello guys, Art-Teeves here. In this video, I'll guide you through the process of creating two really basic and simple leather bags in 3ds Max 2024, Prism UV and Substance Painter. These bags are inspired by the cultist girl from my previous video, but do not belong to her and receive some much more realistic textures. The first bag has 548 polygons, the second bag is more complex with 2.6k polygons and double that many triangles. Both bags are unwrapped onto a single 2K resolution UV map with a padding of 16, though scaling down to 1K is possible with minimal quality loss, except for the first bag, where I had enlarged the UV chunks to enhance the resolution of its embroidery. Both bags have some image geometry, but are not supposed to be animated. Each bag is a single object that doesn't contain any angons. There are no overlapping UV chunks. Also, I moved my keyboard demonstrator thing to some weird spot, sorry for this guys, but there is nothing I can do about it on this stage. If you like my videos, please be my guest and subscribe to my channel for more stylized content. In 3ds Max, I used the loop regularizer script to shape selected edge loops into perfect circles, ideal for elements like bag rivets and belt holes. You can also use rapid tools for similar results. I applied the weighted normals modifier for smoother shading, which may now be included in 3ds Max's standard package. Prism UV speeds up my unwrapping with its excellent straightening algorithm, but you can use any unwrapping tool, though 3ds Max's native unwrapping without plugins is quite cumbersome. In Substance Painter, I stick to basic smart materials and some really simple fill layers with preset grunges. I won't be showing you the process of painting my octopus embroidery in Photoshop, because the video would be pretty boring, and also because you can use any painting software you prefer with lazy mouse, any kind of mouse movement smoothing enabled, to achieve the result like mine. The entire process for both bags took me around 3 hours, including blockouts, as I worked without references, improvised, and relied on my intuition. The video is sped up by 4 times to keep it engaging, with subtitles for those who want to follow along at a slower pace, with your own music. Just mute my sound and reduce the playback speed in YouTube settings. I'll narrate only the start of each chapter, due to the video length, with a table of contents available in the video description and in the pinned comment. I didn't bake anything initially, but I used my low poly bags as the high poly source for baking the normal map. In retrospect, that wasn't ideal. For normal maps, we should bake from a proper high poly model with detailed geometry to maximize detail. Alternatively, painting details directly onto the texture may be more effective than relying on geometric height. The first bag is created from a simple box using Polygon modeling. It lacks a handle and is designed as a stationary prop. It has 3 vertical supporting edge loops on its front and back faces, plus 3 edge loops to add curvature to the bottom and top parts of each side. The top flap has 15 sides for a smooth curve, which may be excessive. Each edge loop adds approximately 16 polygons, and we could likely remove a few without compromising shading, depending on optimization goals. Similarly, curved edges have 5 chamfers, but 3 might suffice for efficiency. Supporting edge loops are added while holding the Shift key in 3ds Max to respect the existing edge flow. Volume is created using the shell modifier. Then I add horizontal supporting edge loops to the sides, ensuring they are flattened on the corresponding axis and aligned at the same height. I insert and bridge the inner parts of both sides to complete the structure. Next I adjust the curvature of the top and bottom side edges. All external edges receive a single chamfer. Omitting chamfers could save polygons, but in that case painting them on texture might be necessary for visual fidelity. I also add vertical edge loops to my bag to enhance the curvature of its top and bottom. To optimize my bag, I remove its internal geometry such as horizontal supporting edge loops, since the bottom is rarely visible. I slightly raise the bottom to save UV space while ensuring it remains out of sight. In fact, you can raise it way further than I did. Only external edges of the bag's sides are chamfered, as internal chamfers are typically not visible. The second bag is created from a box that I convert to a NURMs object. I set its iteration count to 2 and use some non-destructive modeling to shape the initial form. After adjusting a few lattice points to establish the basic silhouette, I focus only on the left side, so I can apply symmetry later in the process. Next I convert the bag to an editable poly, remove 3/4 of the mesh and reduce the poly count as much as possible while keeping the surface smooth. Sometimes it helps to add extra edge loops while holding shift, then delete the neighboring loops. Alternatively, I collapse edge rings that separate two loops. The remaining topology is cleaned up manually, mainly using the cut tool along with other polygon modeling techniques. Once the base shape is ready, I apply symmetry, bridge the two upper parts of the bag, and reapply symmetry after resolving any minor issues. After finalizing the top curve and ensuring perfect symmetry, I manually trim the poly count further. At this stage, I also remove some inner geometry to save polygons, just like I did with the first bag. For the flap, I create a copy of the bag to avoid damaging the original model while experimenting. I remove unnecessary edge loops, add new ones with shift to keep the surface smooth, and refine the curvature. Since this design has a more pronounced curved silhouette, additional edge support is required to maintain proper shading. Again I remove half of the mesh to work on a single side, reposition vertices and adjust the flap's curve. I thicken some of the flap's edges and use the FFD 4x4 modifier to fine-tune its shape. Finally, I chamfer both the inner and outer edges. Because this bag is more detailed than the first, it's worth using a few extra polygons to preserve the quality of the form. I'll resume the narration in the next part of the video. The belt and strap are created the same way I modeled the leather luggage box in my robotic steampunk cab project. Essentially, the belt has no backside, it's embedded directly into the bag, and the strap itself is embedded as well, without a fully defined opening. Keep the poly count under control here. 3 edges are enough to define any smooth curve, while the belt and its holes only need a single chamfer. Make sure all elements, including the belt, strap and even the metal rivets, have enough thickness to match the slightly cartoony stylized look of the design. For the belt tip, I detach it and extend it by pulling the lower part while working in local coordinates. Then I detach the parts of the strap it intersects and use the Provolone tool to blend them together. Once that's done, I manually clean up the topology and weld it back into the rest of the model. Since these surfaces are flat, you can safely use triangles here if needed. However, whenever two curved surfaces intersect, it's better to surround the intersection with a loop of near square polygons. That's also why I add some extra supporting edge loops. Avoid triangles on curved areas, especially if the model will be animated. Trees can create shading artifacts when the model bends. For the belt holes, I start by chamfering the central vertices, subdividing the resulting polygons, deleting the faces, and then converting their edges into circles using the loop regularizer script. I also add extra supporting edge loops between the holes. The same approach works for extruding the metal rivets as well. The side pockets are created using the same NURMs workflow I applied to the main body of the bag. I start by blocking out the base shape, then use the shell modifier to add volume. After that, I manually reposition a few edge loops, chamfer the necessary edges, and use Polygon to merge the pocket with the corresponding area of the bag. Once the operation is complete, I clean up the geometry, remove unnecessary edge loops inside the pocket, attach the pocket back to the main mesh, and finally apply symmetry. Make sure the pockets have enough thickness to match the bag's slightly stylized proportions. After symmetry is applied, I fine-tune both pockets by adding some extra supporting edge loops around the entire bag where needed. The bag's handle is modeled as a separate object. Keep the poly count reasonable, but be mindful of the handle's surrounding and visual importance. Once the handle's size and shape look right, I use Polygon to merge it with the top of the bag, making sure to surround each intersection with a clean loop of near square polygons. To build the handle, I create one half by combining two bent objects. When I am satisfied with their form, I apply symmetry and optimize the poly count. I also add two large rivets on each side of the handle for additional detail. Make sure the handle is thick enough to match the bag's stylized aesthetic, and that it follows the angle of the surface it attaches to. If you plan to animate or attach the bag to a character later, you may need to adjust this step accordingly. The handle is not a place to cut corners on poly count. It's one of the most prominent and curved features of the model, so extra geometry is justified. Once the shape is finalized, I detach the corresponding area of the bag and Polygon it to the handle. As with the pockets, I clean up the topology manually, maintaining smooth geometry and surrounding intersections with well-structured polygon loops. Triangles are fine for flat, non-deforming areas. If you run into shading issues, you can always apply a weighted normals modifier based on the existing smoothing groups for cleaner shading. To finish, I manually adjust the topology, while occasionally using the edge constraint option for precise control. At this point, symmetry isn't reapplied, since it was intentionally broken when making the handle slightly asymmetrical. In fact, adding a subtle symmetry with an FFD 4x4 modifier before attaching the handle often improves the overall look. Finally, I select all remaining n-gons and convert them into clean pods. This part is universal, so I'll repeat most of the things I've mentioned in my previous videos. When it comes to final adjustments and checks, I save my models, reset and assign their pivot points manually, reset their scale, rotation and X-form, group my bags, and set the group's pivot point to the bottom of the middle part, placing the group to 000 scene coordinates. Next, I use the 3ds Max's X-View tool to scan my model for some overlapping or isolated vertices and open edges. If you added some extra elements to your bags, make sure they intersect them and each other properly and don't share any vertices or planes. At this point, you shall also reset the scale, rotation and X-form of most elements and set their pivot points manually, remembering their proper initial rotation angles. If you used mirroring or symmetry while modeling, it's especially important to reset the X-form of your model and make sure that there are no flipped normals remaining. Just make sure to save your file before resetting the X-form. Normally, hard edges require corresponding UV splits for padding, but UV splits do not require hard edges. Hard edge placement is about controlling low poly smoothing behavior and baked normal gradation. UV seam placement is about optimizing usable texture space, while also limiting texture distortion. Bringing the two together is about balancing visual quality with resource efficiency. Using fewer hard edges and UV splits tends to be more resource efficient, but it is also important to make sure the final product looks good. It's generally considered best practice to strategically pair and place hard edges and UV seams along natural breaks and shapes. Normally, you can avoid sharp angles and hard edges by beveling and chamfering these edges and going with everything smooth. It means more polygons but less drastic gradients on the low poly shading for the normal map to compensate when baked. To further improve shading on beveled low poly meshes, you can use weighted normals. My model doesn't have any transparent elements, so I've unwrapped both of my bags to a single 2K res UV map with a pixel padding of 16. Later I scaled the map down to 1K res, but the renders you saw have 2K for the sake of YouTube demo quality. My model is relatively simple, so I've split my UVs according to existing hard edges and added some seams manually. Next I simply exploded all cylinders and straightened everything I could straighten in Rhythm. The thing I completely forgot to do was upscaling the first bag for its embroidery to look better. It may become blurry on a small UV chuck, especially with a resolution of 1K. I unwrapped the model to ensure there were no overlapping UV elements. When baking my model, I set the highest possible amount of raise on all tabs, disabled the ID section, and switched subsampling to 16. I also double-checked the model to ensure there were no purple lines or red fragments, though red artifacts would be impossible in this case, since we aren't baking a high poly mesh onto a low poly one. Additionally, I selected the option to use my low poly model as the high poly source during baking. First, I created a separate folder for each bag and applied black masks to work on them individually. I started with the leathered preset matte material and tweaked its settings, especially the tiling of its ornament pattern. Then I duplicated the material, added a height fill layer to its folder, and used the follow along path tool to place it along the edges, forming a leather frame. After that, I duplicated the layer again to create a lining seam. To do this, I masked the fill layer, adjusted its roughness and height data, and used another curve generated with follow along path tool for accurate placement. For stitching, I used the stitch generator of a brush with slight size and angle jitter adjustments. Technically, I could have extracted the curve data from the earlier follow along path step, but I kept forgetting about this option. Next, I added a bright fill layer and masked it with a mask generator, adjusting the curvature to highlight certain edges. Then I applied a dirt gradient by masking a dim fill layer with a ground dirt smart mask and slightly increasing its blending opacity. Finally, I used the embroidery tool to apply a simple custom design to the bag. I only made minor adjustments to its settings. There are excellent tutorials dedicated to embroidery techniques on YouTube, so I won't repeat the basics here. If you notice visible UV seams, switching your grunge layers to triplanar projection can help hide them effectively. For color work, always block out your main colors first and refine them later with a reference image, a pre-made color palette, or by reviewing the model in context. This approach is far more efficient than picking colors one by one. I edited out the parts of my recording where I was testing colors. It took me quite a while. Also, for beginners, it's often easier to start with darker or more muted tones before moving on to bright, saturated colors. In my case, there were very few visible UV seams, so I didn't need to use the paint layer and clone stamp tools. Still, it's a good idea to rotate your environment now and then, and adjust lighting settings during texturing to evaluate your model under different conditions. The second bag was textured the same way as the first one. If you plan to create multiple bags, make sure to fill your texture atlas efficiently to maximize UV space. Scale up specific UV islands where you want to place high-resolution embroidery or stickers. For even sharper results with embroidery, consider using a decal workflow. I think this covers everything I wanted to mention. Thanks for watching, guys. If my videos are of use to you, be my guest and subscribe to my channel for more stylized content. And most importantly, have a great day.